Good evening, everyone, and welcome to the latest in the interview series done by the Communist Party of Ireland in conjunction with the Socialist Voice. I'm Jimmy Doran. I'm the National Industrial Secretary of the Communist Party of Ireland, and tonight I'm delighted to be joined by Jane Crowe, the shop steward from Henry Street branch of Debenhams, who are in dispute now for over 140 days. And we're also joined by Brian Forbes, the National Coordinator of Mandate Trade Union. I'd like to start with Jane and just give us a brief outlay of your working life in Debenhams, how long you're there, your role, and were you happy there, and the general vibe about the place before this dispute.
Now, this might give away my age now if I'm giving these numbers. But it was now over 140 days on strike, but it feels like I've done 140 years in there. I was 24 years in Debenhams. I've done various jobs over those years, and the last one was in the click and collect department. So very profitable department, where all the parcels were done and ordered and collected. So yeah, a long time there, from the sales floor, security, loads of different positions in it, but really enjoyed it. It was like a big huge family. Everyone, we all knew each other's families. We all had family working there. We celebrated milestones with each other along the way. I think mine was one of the last ones, birthday. But yeah, it was a great place to work with the people you worked with. Yeah, it was brilliant.
I suppose that's similar to workplaces all over the country. All we want to do is go in there, have a decent job, bit of dignity in our work, and a decent rate of pay, and go home and have a meal with your family, a couple of drinks at the weekend, and if you fit in a holiday in the summer, that's all we're asking. But unfortunately, employers don't always give us that. So 24 years, Jane, that's a long time. Were you a member of the union when you started work, or did you join later? And what inspired you to take a leading role in the trade union then and become a shop steward?
No, I was already in the union. I joined the union in, God, let me think, 1992 when it was Aidatu. I joined then. Then I moved from that employer into Debenhams, and I was there about a year when I joined the House Committee, and then got elected as the shop steward. So I was 22 years a shop steward in Debenhams. Was it something I'd always planned to do? No, it was done now a necessity at the time. But then my parents were both shop stewards, so I don't know. Maybe they say it's in the blood. But yeah, it was necessity that I done it, and I loved every minute of it. Yeah, I going in there and arguing points and winning the points. That's brilliant. But yeah, everybody should join a union. Everybody should be in a union, no matter what. It's once you start a job, find out what union represents you, and just go and join it. But no, it's a long time in the union. Yeah.
So you didn't dig it off a stone there. Your man kind of read it into you. I remember going into town with my dad one time for a gallon of paint, and I was going into Debenhams and Cable Street there, and he grabbed me with the scruff of the neck, was about 60. Come back here now, and he says there's a strike on in there. And from that day, I learned a lesson or two. But yeah, that's great to hear.
They told me I had it easy because I didn't have to collect the dues and walk down to the union with them.
Yeah. So then, unfortunately, at the outbreak of COVID, Debenhams decided to close the place down, and you were all made redundant. Give us a little bit of information on how that took place, and any payments you did get, and what did you expect to get, and what did you not get, so to speak.
Right, this all started Easter week. So the Tuesday of Easter week, I think that was the 6th of April. It was being announced on British TV that the UK was going into administration. But we all received a message to say, don't be worrying, Ireland is great, we're holding our own, we're fine. So that was the Monday. The Thursday, which was the 9th, we all woke up to a generic email telling us all our jobs were gone, that they wouldn't be reopening after lockdown or whatever. So obviously that was devastating, because we have people from 40 odd years service down to young people that was their college jobs. So yeah, it was a horrible way to find out by an email, a very cold, calculated way to receive it. And that just, we didn't want to sit down and just take it. We said, no, we have to do something about this. Obviously, COVID was out. We were very restricted. But myself and the shop steward down in Patrick Street, Cork, we talked and we said, no, we have to do something. We can't be forgotten. So we organised protests outside our stores, and they were socially distanced. We had it planned. We had our masks and we had our gloves on. We were equipped to cope. We're in our, I think it was 2 kilometres at the time. Some of us may have pushed it now a little bit, but we were more or less in there. Cork went off without any problems. Henry Street became national news with the way the Gardaí treated us. They more or less pushed the forced crowd off the street, threatening to be put into the back of Garda vans, threatening their names, addresses, told it was non-essential. Then a second group arrived and we set up. So while the guards were away pushing the first crowd, the second crowd were there for the media, getting our cause out there, stressing what had happened. That it was done under the umbrella of COVID. And then the guards came back to us and started pushing us aside and asking for our names. I've lost count at about 4 or 5 times now in the last 4 months. My name and address has been taken. But we got our point across. We had our homemade posters saying, that we were, what had happened to us. And the media were there and ran with it. And with the Gardaí, with the way they treated us, actually helped us. Because not so far down the road from our store, there was a different crowd at the courts, all gathered together and had no Gardaí separating them, whereas we were doing it properly and were moved along. We were told it was non-essential, but we did say we felt it was essential. We were fighting for our jobs and that it was our right to protest, but they were having none of it. So then the following week we decided we'll transfer our arm and do it again. This time the roles were reversed. Patrick Street had all their names taken, and us, we weren't treated quite as badly. We were allowed to stay to do interviews and have photographs taken for 20 minutes, and then we were moved off, which we complied with because all we were doing was wanting to get our story out there. And since then, we've been doing a phenomenal amount through Mandate. We've done protests at the stores around the country. We've done bank protests outside the Bank of Ireland because they're part owners of Debenhams. We've gone up north with Brian and his team to Belfast and Derry and done protests up there. Ourselves as groups have the 4 Dublin stores joined together and we protest outside the Dáil. And we have spoken with many TDs, and including Micheál Martin before we became Taoiseach. We spoke with him and he'd, kept saying we were treated terribly and whatever. But it's gone a long way now. We just feel like we're not being heard sometimes. We go a long time without any communication, and then we feel like we're being forgotten about. But and they're the down times. They're the days you feel, God, we're sitting here on a picket in the lashings of rain. What are we doing it for? But then you'll have a lovely passerby come over and say, "We've seen you on the internet. We're following your story. You are doing fantastic. Keep it up. Keep it going." They might come and give us, our picket is right next door to Aldi, so a lot of people go in and throw an extra something into their basket and bring it out and give it to us while we're on the picket line. They come and bring us coffees. So they're the days that pick you up then. So, but we're still there. We're still fighting.
That's great, Jane. It's interesting why the guards give you the attention there. They certainly weren't taking names or enforcing social distance regulations down at Clifton over the weekend. But of course, they are no threat to the state. They are the state where the Debenhams workers are certainly putting it up to the state and defending workers' rights. And the government would have little knowledge, plenty of knowledge of it, but little sympathy for you. I'll move over to Brian now and ask Brian just to introduce yourself and give us a little bit about your role and mandate and your experience in disputes over the years and defending workers' rights and workers' struggle in general.
I'm Brian Forbes. I'm a national coordinator for organising campaigns, political lobbying, basically everything but industrial relations at the minute. And I have a background. I've been a trade union member. I've been a shop steward. I've been on strike for protracted periods of time in the north. I was a member of NUPSA. I was on the NUPSA General Council. I was on, the hierarchy of the internal, the shop stewards as well in the union. I came to Mandate 15 years ago as a divisional organizer, and I worked for a number of years then in the industrial side of the union, taking cases for individual cases and collective cases for workers. Right through to the Labour Court and beyond. Been involved again in a number of high-profile strikes with Mandate. The latest ones being the Lloyd's dispute, and we're working very, very much on trying to make sure that we get organised in a variety of different sectors across the retail sector, but also in pharmacy, where we're making inroads with the likes of Sam McCauley's, Lloyd's and others. But we're also doing a lot of organising and gaining ground in Paddy Powers, for example, and other locations as well. So, or other employments as well. So we don't have enough resources to do it all. But certainly we're doing with what we have, we're doing not too bad at the minute. We've been recruiting pretty solidly since the start of the year. And even though we've lost probably in the region of, with the Debenhams workers gone, and we've probably lost maybe a couple of thousand by the end of this year, but we've gained as well, probably somewhere in the region of about 1,400. So numbers wise, we're not as bad as a lot of the other unions in terms of, the burn or the churn, and we've managed to a lot of people are basically gravitating now towards unions as well, because they realize that they're safer in a union, but they're also gravitating to it with anger, and a little bit of fire in the belly. And that's what really enthuses me most. It's whenever people like Jane and the Debenhams strikers, who I would consider, myself personally, I would consider each and every one of them to be working class heroes. And I do know there's been similarities made to the Dunn strike, etc., etc. But I think the Debenhams workers themselves stand alone in terms of the way that they have handled themselves, the way that they've put themselves out there. And it's their union. We hear people talk about the union does this and the union does that. It's the workers that are the union, and they have demonstrated worker power, and they've demonstrated, certainly they've made the likes of Bank of Ireland, KPMG, they've made, they've had meetings with Taoiseach and Taoiseach. They've really hit, the ground running in terms of, the amount of respect and the amount of sort of regard for them out there across the general public. It's just amazing. And we get that on a regular basis coming on to us as well. And are we doing enough? We could do more maybe, and there's an argument to be made there. But again, that just falls down to resources and stuff like that. But we can talk about that as we go on as well. But that's a very basic sort of introduction to myself.
Thanks for that, Brian. Yeah, certainly. fire in the belly is something that Jane and our colleagues are given. When you see people standing piss in the rain for 140 days, 24 hours a day, I've been there. I know what it's like. It's not easy, and it's certainly an inspiration to us all. And it may be on Henry Street where there was other inspirational young women, most of them, who have inspired a generation of trade unions, and certainly were inspirational to me in my early days. I used to go down there.
I mean, some people talk about the union in inverted commas, like as if it's like a separate entity from the workers, and it's somewhat kind of like a cliche, and you hear it all the time, but the workers really are the union, and like I'm a paid employee, I belong to another union, Unite. If I'm unhappy with Unite, I know what I need to do, and that's what's really so gratifying about watching the Debenhams strike, and watching the workers take control of it themselves. I'm enthused by that. I think that is the way forward for workers. Is where unions are the bureaucracy kicks in, or where unions are legislatively tied. I think it's incumbent upon the workers themselves to take control of their own destiny, to take control of their union, and push the envelope as far as they humanly can. And I would be very much in favour of that as well.
Yeah, there's an old saying, and actually, the trade union is like a wheelbarrow, only as good as the people pushing it. Yeah. And by God, the women and men in Debenhams are certainly pushing it to the.
I could stand outside KPMG for the next 6 months myself, shouting and roaring, but really at the end of the day, it's not going to make a blind bit of difference. But if the workers collectivise and the workers stand united outside KPMG, it makes a difference, and it makes them look up, and it makes them sort of like very cautious. It's we've done a lot in the last 6 months. As Jane has said, we've done Bank of Ireland, 10 protests outside, we've done Derry, Belfast. I would love to be able to do more. I really genuinely would, and I think the union as well would love to be able to do more. But there's a lot going on out there at the minute as well. So as much as we humanly can, we've been supporting the guys. But it ain't going to be won by Mandate standing at a picket line. It ain't going to be, or Mandate officials standing at a picket line. It ain't going to be won by me standing outside KPMG or anything like that. It'll be won by the workers in conjunction with our union, and working along with the union and organising within the union, and getting to the heart of where they need to get to in terms of bad legislation, in terms of bad laws, having them changed for the future as well. Because this is just ridiculous. It's a scandal that this is happening to these guys. The loyalty that they've shown that company and the way that they've been treated, it's a thundering disgrace that this country of ours has abandoned them to a certain extent and hasn't implemented decent legislation to protect them and to protect others who are going to suffer in retail over the course of the next number of months and possibly years ahead as a result of COVID-19 and the fallout from that as well. And I just think that, people need to get off their arse. That's the colloquial term for it, but and really take it to them, really put it to them in no uncertain terms that it's their duty as elected representatives to represent the people. And at the minute, in the likes of Debenhams and other examples as well, which I'll go into later on, they're just not playing ball, and it's a capitalist system, as we know, but it's not acceptable for them as elected representatives to at one stage meet Jane, meet Valerie, meet others, shop stewards from Debenhams, and tell them how difficult it is and give them tea and sympathy. I could love to tell them where they can stick their tea and sympathy. We want legislation, and we want it now, and we want legislation that hasn't got holes in it, so that the fast food industries or the likes of Debenhams or others can poke holes in it, or Duns, or whoever you want to call. So it is, it's necessary, but it's necessary now, not in 6 months, not in 8 months, not in 10 months, now, because it's happening now.
Absolutely. So, John, maybe we go back to you there. You finished off there where the dispute had just started. So now we're, as we say, 140 days in. What do you see as the union's role? Are you in contact, or are the shop stewards in contact much with the trade union? And how do the general membership feel about the role of the union and the role of the workers, and where the pushing and the shoving needs to be done?
Okay, sorry, Brian, but
you're all right, Jim. Don't worry about it.
No, it's not you. You're not. We haven't seen our DO since week 3 of we haven't seen our official since week 3 of the actual protest or the strike that we're having. We've had John Douglas down once, but because we invited him to our picket as a guest because Sinn Féin were coming. Mary Lou MacDonald was coming, so he came to that. We've had 2 protests outside our own store with Mandate and 1 or 2 outside the bank. Everything else we've done ourselves. We've done all the Dáil ourselves. We've done the convention centre ourselves. We went, as Brian mentioned there, KPMG, the 4 Dublin stores, we took it to KPMG's offices, the liquidator. We took it to their offices last week and demonstrated outside there and around the country. Any of the stores that had KPMG offices near them took it there as well. Yes, Mandate organised us to meet with various political people. But Valerie and Madeline and Jerry down in Cork, they organised and I came up to Dublin and met with the Taoiseach themselves. Myself and 4 others, we organised and met with Minister Troy because he took over in regards to the Duffy Cahill report. We met with him ourselves on that. We've been down, myself was invited as a guest through all the campaigns down to the convention centre on the day of the new Dáil. When I was inside, I don't know where I got this from, where I got the neck to do it. But when I was in there, Micheál Martin just walked in. I turned around and I said, "Hello, Micheál. I don't know if you remember me. I spoke to you at the Dáil." The fair dues, he said, "Yes." He said, "I remember you're up from Debenhams and whatever." I done the same with Leo Varadkar, but I did point out that he wouldn't know who I was because none of his party ever came out to meet us. I done that with a good few politicians there, and it was an honour to be invited to the convention centre. But while I was nice and cosy in the convention centre, for the few hours that I was there was people out protesting outside in the lashings of rain. My own mother was there, she's 76. They were there for all those hours, chanting and whatever, we got banners made up, posters made up. Mandate has never supported us going to the Dáil. They've never come with us to the Dáil, which is very disheartening when we decide to do these things. Anything we've done on radio, TV, they're all contacts we've managed to find ourselves and just build it up from there. Their phone numbers are in our phones. We ring them or message them when we're doing anything and they turn up. We put our own press releases out. These are things we never knew how to do and would have presumed our union would do for us, but they're things we have to learn ourselves because the union didn't do it. Now, on the flip side of that, as I said earlier, you do need to be in a union. No one would listen to us without knowing we're in the union. The company wouldn't listen to us. KPMG certainly wouldn't be listening to us. And the politicians wouldn't be listening to us if we were doing it on our own without a union behind us. Morale is very low on the picket lines. As I said, we don't see anybody, and it's not just their store. None of the Blanchardstown seen their official once. Some of the stores have never seen their officials in the 4 months. I know there's COVID. I know they're spread thin, but I mean, we're 4 months. We're there 4 months. We do get updates. We do have shop stewards meetings every 2, maybe 3 weeks. But the members want them every week, even if it's to tell us there is no update, just to be in the loop, to be informed. Then it is very disheartening. It really is. But you know, what can you do? It's the way it is. We send emails off. We ask. We're told every email is answered, but they're not. Our emails are just sitting there that have never been answered from Mandate. Sometimes we push stuff forward, they get knocked back. So when we do organise our own stuff, we do it on our own. As I said, we met with Minister Troy about the Duffy Cahill. Now, it was nothing to do with the enhanced redundancy. That was done separately with Mandate. You know, when we met with different parties, when the staff met with Micheál Martin himself, who actually turned up to the Patrick Street picket line last week. I mean, our officials aren't turning up, but the Taoiseach of the country is turning up to a picket line because they wanted to see the conditions they were in, the weather they were in. But yeah, the Duffy Cahill is very important going forward. So that's why we met with Minister Troy, because we don't want what's happening to us to happen to anybody else. But unfortunately, this was said 5 years ago with Cleary's, that this will never happen again. And as a result of that, there was an investigation done, and the Duffy Cahill report was put together, and it has sat there for 5 years. If that had been done and signed off and gone through the proper channels, we wouldn't be where we are today. We would have had a collectively agreed package paid out to us. So we have made suggestions to Minister Troy about how workers should be looked after, that we haven't seen Debenhams books for last year. We've seen them every year since 2010. We've seen their books on our yearly negotiations and their yearly meetings. There's two of us selected with Jerry Light to go in and look at the books. We never seen last year's books, but we have to believe what they're telling us, that they're down millions, but we haven't seen the books. So we have asked that is included in the Duffy Cahill report, that you know, the employees and their representatives get to see these things, to see what's happening, to see if something is going to happen, and various other things we have suggested as well. Because going forward, the Duffy Cahill, I don't think will help us now. I think if it's signed off, it's past us. But we will still fight for it, because we don't want it to happen to anybody else. But that doesn't mean that that's our only fight. We're still fighting ourselves. We're not going anywhere. The stock isn't leaving the stores. We'll sit there, even if it's snowing out, we have our cars to sit in. You know, the people sat out in the two storms. The Gardaí in Patrick Street went and asked them to go home, and they will watch for them, because the water levels was rising right beside the store. Our own store there last week, it was so bad, the Gardaí drove up and asked them what they wanted, and went and got them teas and coffees at 3 o'clock in the morning. So they didn't have to go out and do anything, and they drove around to do the hourly checks that we do. So yeah, we're going nowhere. People have to listen to what we're saying. They have to see what we're doing. So they will be able to manage in their job. If this happens to them, they could look back and say, well, Jesus, this is what Debenhams done. They got out, they got together, they organised, and they followed the steps and the rules, and they went out and they done it. And that's what we want everybody to learn from this, is how to do it peacefully, even though KPMG will tell you that we're very violent people, considering 98% of us are middle-aged mammies and nannies, they have said that we're very aggressive. They're the words they've used, aggressive towards their employees. You must remember their employees are big security men. They're the only employees that we deal with. And we had one woman, she's 4 foot nothing, up against one of these fellas. And he's saying she intimidated him going into the store. So this is where we are now. We're still there. We're going nowhere. 140 days. We have plans to go to the Dáil again now that they're back sitting, to remind them we haven't gone anywhere. We're still here. We don't need any more tea and sympathy. We want them to get up and do it and sort it. They're the only ones that can do it and can sort it. And you know, we're not pussyfooting about anymore. It's a long time. Winter is coming. We want this done, and we want it sorted, and we want it done now. And we will be telling them that this week.
It's great to hear that passion from you, Jane. I suppose the difference between Micheál Martin going down to the picket line in Patrick Street, he has absolutely no intention of doing anything for you. He is your class enemy, and you know, he'll go down there and smile and shake hands and kiss babies, and that's what he's about. We've seen his buddies down in Clifton during the week. Regarding the mandate, officials not going down to picket line, well, maybe, you know, part of the problem is, and we let Brian in on this now, I am aware that Mandate are doing a lot of negotiating in the background, trying to save some of the stores and save some of the jobs. And maybe the thing is that they don't want to go down there without good news. But I do see what you're saying 100%. It would be nice to get the recognition and support. I know myself, in the early hours of the morning when you're soaked right through to the skin and you're beginning to wane and somebody blows that horn past you, that's inspiration. And that gets you going right through at 7 or 8 o'clock in the morning. And that's what we need. So trade unionism has changed an awful lot in the last 20 years, particularly since the introduction of the 1990 Industrial Relations Act. I myself am involved in the Trade Union Led Forum, who campaigned to have the 1990 Industrial Act abolished. Mandate Trade Union have as a policy, as do Connect Trade Union, Unite, and the Civil Service Section enforce it. So the 1990 Industrial Relations Act really restricts unions in what they can do. And so maybe Brian could fill us in what could be done differently if the 1990 Act wasn't there, because I know the union's hands are tied. And maybe also comment a little bit on how we can stop Debenhams and becoming Clearly's too, and what needs to be done with the Duffy Cal report.
There's a lot there, Jimmy.
Yes.
let me just try and deal with Jane's sort of suggestion that the union hasn't been as visible maybe as she would have liked it to have been. I mean, I understand the frustration. I appreciate the frustration. I'm not going to get into a debate or an argument with Jane around that. That's how she feels, and she's quite justified in feeling that way, and I'm fine with that. I would dispute some of the stuff that she's saying in terms of, because I do know for a fact that officials have been attending picket lines. Some maybe not, but some have been attending picket lines. We've asked them to. And there is an issue in relation to a lot of the workers now are working remotely as well and stuff. So the opportunity to get out to picket lines just wouldn't have been as sort of clear as it would have been maybe under normal circumstances. But there's a massive amount of work going on, not just behind the scenes, but actually up front as well. Our officials and our administration staff have submitted the largest referral in the history of the Workplace Relations Commission. 1,500 cases, individual cases, on behalf of the workers there, doubled. So it's over 3,000 in total. And that was a huge amount of work, a huge amount of effort on behalf of the union. It's unseen work, I accept that, but it's still vital in terms of pushing the agenda forward for the workers themselves. The dispute itself, the resolutions, the dispute resolution sort of discussions are still ongoing. There hasn't been any conclusion to them yet. We do have some developments, and hopefully they'll manifest themselves in the next couple of days. And if and when they do, If talks break down, for example, we'll advise our members immediately that talks have broken down, and we'll call them and tell them that. But the if a proposal emerges as well, we'll move swiftly to a national ballot of our members. And I think we've always given that undertaking to do that, because it was the members that took the decision nationally to go out and strike, and it'll be the members that take a decision whether to accept or reject any deal that's done. Cleary's. You talked about Cleary's, Jimmy. You talk about the similarities between Debenhams and Cleary's. Well, let's talk about the similarities between the Paris Bakery and River Island and Game and La Senza, and we could go on forever, talking about all those. Like I was in the sit-in La Senza with our members there, and I know what it takes to do something like that. And I'm not afraid, and I know Mandate isn't afraid to support members when they do take actions that sort of put themselves, legally beyond where they should be, in terms of the 1990 Act, etc. John Douglas was General Secretary. He's retired now. I think it's a little bit sort of, it's not fair maybe criticising John at this stage when he's just retired, but I accept what Jane's saying. John Douglas sat in the Paris Bakery dispute while he was President of Congress. He's the General Secretary of Mandate. We have a history in Mandate, right, of not being afraid to put ourselves out there when it comes to worker struggles. And yes, you're right. There is similarities in Cleary's. Jane talked about the Duffy Cahill report, and I'll come to that in a second. But you're talking about Cleary's like it wasn't a Mandate dispute; it was a Sub 2 dispute. 160 years in operation, sold the operational part of the company to an insolvency specialist, and then they just basically flipped the property value for big profit. Essentially, that's what happened. 130 employees, Cleary's employees, and 330 concession employees. It's similar in some ways to the Debenhams in that people were forced out of their place of employment in Cleary's, for example. Virtually minutes they had, Jimmy and Jane, to get out the door. They were told basically, good luck, good night, out you go, and the security were taking them out the door. Debenhams used the COVID-19 sort of excuse, in inverted commas, to up sticks. They emailed, as Jane outlined, they emailed the workers who had significant loyal service, no redundancies on both of those. But the victory for the Cleary's workers, the 130 Cleary's workers that were employed by Cleary's, it showed that with resolution, with dedication, with fighting for a cause, and organising within their union, that you can get a victory out of this. You can win, because people know that these politicians need to do the right thing, and the general public aren't stupid. They support the Debenhams workers. They supported the Cleary's workers, and it's a bit sort of every time I walk down O'Connell Street and I look across where the Cleary's entrance is, and I see the Jim Larkin statue, and I look at it and I see the inscription, "The great only appear great because we are on our knees. Let us rise." That's probably for me, one of the biggest lessons that we can learn from the Cleary's dispute. In relation to Duffy Cahill, I'm not an expert on Duffy Cahill by any stretch of the imagination, but it's I've looked into it over the course of the last number of years. It came out in 2016. It was initiated because of the Cleary's dispute, and the workers there felt, and as do the Debenhams workers now at the minute, felt very strongly that they were very determined to see new legislation, so that that the same thing wasn't going to happen to others coming behind them. And Jane just articulated there exactly the feelings as well of the workers in there, the strikers and Debenhams, in that they're not prepared to walk away and leave the similar situation for another retail outlet or for another store for that to happen. The report itself, just very briefly, it examined the employee protection legislation and the context of ensuring that companies could not avoid their obligations to their employees. It's absolutely shameful and scandalous that we're 4 years into the Duffy Cahill report, and not a single thing has been done on it, no movement whatsoever. Now, there's several quite substantial recommendations in Duffy Cahill, but the thing about Duffy Cahill is it can't be implemented like an a la carte menu. You can't pick one thing and and think that that's going to work without all of the others. The Duffy Cahill has to be all or nothing. It has to be implemented in full, and it has to. What it attempts to do, I think, in some ways, is treat workers with some kind of respect and dignity that employers don't treat them with at the minute. They think that they can get away with just stepping up and walking away. And Jane and the Debenhams strikers are proving that that's not possible for them at this point in time. But we're talking about here forcing employers across the board to consult with their employees for a period of 30 days. There is the capacity within the Duffy Cahill report to recover an asset or proceeds of the sale of an asset where an employer transfers it out of the business with the effect of frauding their employees. I mean, you could argue that Debenhams, by transferring the Debenhams.ie website to the UK company, you could argue that that wouldn't have happened under Duffy Cahill. And you could argue that that was a very Slevin, move by Debenhams to hive off part of that, part of that company that would have realised significant resources and significant significant money, quite possibly to help enhance redundancy package as well, to help the enhanced redundancy package. But I just want to pick up on another thing that Jane mentioned there about the Duffy Cahill report. It isn't too late for the Debenhams workers. We've been working very hard behind the scenes with the department to see if we can retrospectively have the Duffy Cahill report applied to the Debenhams dispute as well as part of an ongoing sort of resolution to that dispute. So we're not giving up on that. We're not saying that if we move towards getting legislation, that legislation just starts from that day. We're arguing and we're fighting for the legislation to be retrospective, because this is a Debenhams piece of legislation. Now, it was Cleary's. Duffy Cahill was produced as a result of Cleary's. We now need Debenhams legislation. We now need legislation using the Duffy Cahill report, but moving it right on now further and having it implemented and having it signed off as quickly as possible. And I think that is something that we've been working extremely hard on. I think just as well, and I'm sorry for hogging this a little bit, but the Industrial Relations Act, Jimmy, I mean, you mentioned it there on a number of occasions, and if you're not in, if you don't work for a trade union, you hear somebody say the IR Act 1990, and you don't really sort of appreciate the shittiness of it all, right? And what has happened, I mean, this act replaced the Trade Disputes Act way back, that was 1990, and basically the Trade Disputes Act, I'm sure some people will be aware of this. Any and all actions under the Trade Disputes Act, provided they weren't illegal, were free from criminal and civil liability. And one of the cleverest things that Bertie Ahern ever did was fool the trade union movement at that time that they were going into social partnership, which was an absolute disaster for the trade union movement, an absolute fucking mess as far as Mandate were concerned and the low-paid workers that we represent were concerned. It delivered nothing for us, and a social partnership will never deliver anything for working class people. But Bertie Ahern, who was a former union official, not to forget that as well, I mean, he imposed, he put forward that Industrial Relations Act to neuter the trade union movement, and the trade union movement back then allowed themselves to be neutered, and allowed themselves to be taken out of the loop in terms of proper actions that needed to be taken. I mean, the Dunn's anti-apartheid strike that you mentioned earlier, Jimmy, in your introduction, that would be illegal today under the 1990 Act because there's a ban on political strikes. I mean, those are heroes from our history, labour heroes from our history that stood for a number of years fighting, even at times fighting their own union, by the way, right? And look, I make no bones about that. That was before Mandate was formed. But yes, there was internal struggles within Mandate at that time, but there wasn't the 1990 Act at that time. The 1990
So
Act.
Brian, what could we do if the 1990 Act wasn't there? Like Jane mentioned going down to KPMG and the Bank of Ireland and that. Could we have literally blockaded them and hopefully the union members in there would have supported the pickets as they would have back in the 60s, like sort of thing. And this is what we're up against. And this is why the likes of Debenhams workers are left, without a friend in the world. Nobody else can support them apart from, I would urge everybody there who has been laid off as a result of COVID-19 to go down and instead of walking around the park with your dog, go down and stand outside the Debenhams stores for a couple of hours every day.
I would go further than that, Jimmy. I would urge every single trade unionist on the island of Ireland, if they're anywhere near the Debenhams strike pickets, to call and say, and give them support and give them solidarity. I mean, it's not an acceptable position for them to feel that they're on their own, because they're not. They genuinely are not. And from the bottom of my heart, I want to do as much as I possibly can to make sure that, that they get the result that they deserve and the result that they need. But you're right, secondary pickets are illegal under the Industrial Relations Act. Individual workers' rights were subjected to lengthy processes and delays in getting justice. There's restrictive requirements on unions in relation to strike ballots. It's effectively Thatcher's legislation, bastardized and produced here by the government of the day. I mean,
Brian, would you say that has led to a lack of experience among trade unions and trade union activists? Like, clearly is a prime example. The shop was shut down. I know they brought in the security mob, like sort of the guys, the balaclavas and the staff vests.
Yeah.
But at the end of the day, back in the day, if that was to happen in a lot of factories around, there would have been a sit-in. I know they're illegal, but I don't believe the people in Cleary's even knew they were illegal or even entered their head to have a sit-in and take control of the property. And instead, they were ushered out. And that is as a direct result of the 1990 Act and the lack of worker struggle experience firsthand by trade union members, trade union shop stewards and activists. Like Jane is saying there about the lack of attention down on the picket line from the union and all the rest. Back in the day when you were out on strike every second week, the union officials were so run off their feet, they hadn't time to visit picket lines, and it was the shop stewards that stood into the breach. I know it's a thankless job. Maybe, Jane, you come back in there for a couple of ideas on how the unions need to, we've been out saying that trade unions need to become radical, but they will become redundant. How would you see that?
Yeah, well, I'll refer back to my mother and father. My dad worked for Volkswagen in the early 70s, and then he became a postman. So they were forever on strike. He was on strike with Volkswagen, and then he were on strike with the post office. And they always say to me, well, why aren't you doing this? Why aren't you doing that? I have to say, we're not allowed. We're not allowed to do it. What do you mean you're not allowed to do it? So I have to tell them about the 1990 Act, which obviously is something I would have never read until now that I need to know the bits in it. So they're just flabbergasted now with this altogether. But going forward, I think unions need to step up more. They need to grow a bigger pair, because really they're going to be, retail is it's decimated. It's going to be even worse. It's a massacre happening with retail jobs, an absolute massacre. And unions that are involved in it really need to step up and be seen more, to be more vocal, supporting their members, because it's not just we were the first. And what we said at the beginning was, I think one of the first quotes I'd ever said was, we're the first, but we certainly won't be the last. And within a week, there was warehouse, there was loads of places after that have all folded. And these are all members that are that are being lost in unions. Now, until jobs pick up again, the membership won't be refilled. And people that, we have our members saying, they would join a union again because they feel they're not getting the support. And any media that has been out there has been put forward by the members. Any radio interviews have been by the members. There's only been a handful of even supporting the Debenhams workers from Mandate. So,
I think that's a bit unfair, Jane. I really
do
do.
you think so? I don't think so. I think the members have done an awful lot more in regards to media that the Mandate has to get our voice heard.
When a union issues, sorry for interrupting, but when a union issues a press release, it's out of our hands. I mean, it's up to the media to carry it. What we're playing against here, it's class war basically. The media are not prepared to give trade unions any kind of coverage, especially if it's to do with strikes, and especially if it's to do with covering issues like Debenhams. We've been issuing press statements constantly. We've done them for every protest. We've done them for every single time. The national strike, the Derry, the Belfast, all of that. And it's if you look even at our shop floor, the new shop floor that's just come out today, you'll see a lot of the stuff in that that covers a lot of what's going on at the minute, and it also gives an update on where things are right now at this point in time, with the discussions and everything else that's going on. But just let me come back, just if you don't mind, Jimmy. Just the 1990 Act, it was the worst dilution of workers' rights in the history of the state. I mean, that's it. That's where it stands. But I do want to deal with something sort of kind of linked to that as well, and that's there's been a number of people that have been visible, been very critical of the union, shouting very loudly about the union on picket lines, and complaining about the union, and some of them have been calling for the nationalisation of Debenhams. Some of them have been calling for a national ballot of our members, in solidarity with the Debenhams workers. I would love that. I would absolutely love to be able to do a national ballot of our members. But does anybody honestly think that if we ballot members in Tesco and Dunn's and we advise them that through that ballot that they could be sacked for taking illegal action, does anyone honestly believe that, or think even for 1 second, that we would win that ballot? Because it's genuinely, I mean, a lot of the stuff that has been said publicly by some political representatives, a lot of the stuff that's happening on the picket line, it's quite disingenuous. I mean, sacrifice your job to show solidarity. It's an anti-union call in some ways by hurlers in the ditch who are doing their best to make unions look weak. But unions and union leaders are only weak because the legislation has forced them to be weak. Now, if you want union leaders to break the law, and you want unions to break the law, then you're going to be waiting for a while, I think, with the union movement. Now, if workers decide that they want to sit in, unions can't tell them to do that. But if they do that, unions should support them in every way possible to make sure that they're not dragged through the courts, etc. I mean, finally, just on this, right, because I do feel very passionate about Jane, and I do feel very passionate about the Debenhams workers, and I'm not prepared to be critical of any of them for any stretch or for any reason. But there are people that have been on those picket lines that have been anti-union and have been calling the union out. And whether the union sends an official down today, tomorrow, or the next day, that ain't going to win the strike. There's a hell of a lot of work going on behind the scenes. There's a hell of a lot of work going on through the WRC with the claims that are being taken. And there's a hell of a lot of work going on to promote this dispute as well. Cleary's dispute went on for 2 years. This dispute is 4 months. I said at the beginning to the Debenhams workers at the very first meeting that we had, and we do have regular meetings, by the way, right, with the shop stewards, regular meetings. And we have regular meetings to tell them.
No, I'm sorry, I have to disagree with that.
Let me just finish. We do have regular meetings with shops. We have regular
3 weeks without meeting.
We have regular meetings with shop stewards, and we have had that, right? Up to the point, let me finish, up to the point where there was engagement with the departments and engagement with the liquidators and engagement on a possibility of coming up with some kind of resolution. That is the only period that we haven't been in touch with the shop stewards in a regular way. That's only a couple of weeks. So it's very disingenuous to say that the union isn't on the pitch. That's wrong. I mean, and then picking up on the other stuff, the hurlers on the ditch, as I call them, it's scandalous. I mean, trying to say that we should nationally ballot our members. I mean, are they having a laugh? Like, I mean, this stuff is just, they're putting stuff out there to attempt to run the union down, to discredit the union, to make the union look weak. And with the utmost respect to Jane and all the others, Debenhams strikers, Some of them have bought onto that, and that's fine. But I'm not going to criticise them for doing that. Social partnership, days lost to strike action on social partnership. 1979, there was 1.4 million days lost. In 2011, there was 3,600 days lost. And in 2018, there was 1,800 days lost. And those days were lost, probably the majority of them, by the Lloyds and the Tesco dispute that Mandate were involved in. So we're
I
not.
suppose, Brian, what we could say too is, like, what proves your point really is every night on RTE news, radio, and television, who do they wheel out to speak for the opposition? And it's Alan bloody Kelly. Like, who does Alan Kelly represent? He represents absolutely nobody. He represents class enemies of workers, and that's all they represent. So that's the control they have of the media, and that's why the trade union statements are not being put out there. Regarding the hurdlers on the ditch and the nonsense that they did it during the water campaign, they did it during the property tax campaign and all this, led the people up the hill, and once the spotlight was gone off on the movement, they were gone. They were gone, and ordinary people were left up at the top of that hill with huge fines to pay for not paying their property tax, etc. So, workers need to be very aware of some of these opportunists who come in there. Like, what is this?
We're all big boys and girls. We know
I realise that,
game.
Come on now,
we know how to play the game.
You've been using them well now. Let's be honest here now.
Yeah.
And
that's
cool for you.
Use them as much as they're using us. Like, we know how to play the game with them.
Well, megaphone diplomacy doesn't work in situations like this now at the minute, and the call for things like that they have been calling for just discredits or attempts to discredit the union. Now, as I say, I'm not going to criticise anybody for believing it or for following it.
I'd love to know what their suggestion is. Everybody leaves the union. What do they do?
Yeah.
What do they do? We go for a walk in the park.
Where's the communities in all of this, Jimmy? Where's the communities in all of this? We during the Tesco dispute, the communities against low pay. We're on the streets. They were on the streets with the unions, right? It's time for communities to step up to the mark. It really is. Unions are neutered at the minute because of legislation. If you want unions to challenge, it has to start in the communities. It has to start at the bottom and work itself through that whole movement. And when I say bottom, I mean that's really where the action's going to sort of take off from, is in working class communities.
Well, as you know, Brian, I was involved in communities against low pay myself during the Lloyds dispute, and I'm sure there's plenty of them listening there. So maybe we'll put out the call tonight for communities against low pay.
I would love it, Jimmy.
A call to action to go there and support these workers, because Jane's fight is our fight. It's every worker in this country's fight. Yeah. We are abandoned, and we're not abandoned by the trade unions. We're abandoned by the ruling class. Them clowns down there whining and dining and playing golf. When Jane is standing in the pissings of rain, I'm lying underneath a bus to get it out, to bring people to work, to bring, doctors and nurses and all that to work, sort of thing. And these clowns are down there drinking. Jesus, I'd love to be down in the hotel drinking me, self stupid. But I don't have the opportunity to do it. Maybe someday I will. I know Brian is good company for a drink too, and I'm sure you are as well, Jane. But no, I don't know. Maybe we wrap it up here, unless Jane or Brian have anything else to say.
Well, just if there are any Mandate members from any retail background that are on this watching, Mandate have always stopped short of putting a call out saying, for them on their lunch break or their day off, to pop around to us, stand with us for an hour. You don't have to hold a placard. It can just be a passerby. Doesn't have to be classed as a secondary picket or anything. Just to come down, say they're from Dunn's or Penny's or Marks and Spencer's, Boots, and say, listen, we know what's happening. We have your back. We hope it doesn't happen to us, but we're here. We know what's happening, and we support you. That's all we're asking for any Mandate member to come and do that with us. We've asked it to be put out there, but they always stop short of actually doing that. But I'm here now, and I'm asking, just for half an hour of your lunch break, before your shift, after your shift, just pop along, tell us what retailer you're working for, and give us your support.
On behalf of Mandate, I agree exactly with what Jane has said, and I would ask all our members If they have a half an hour, as Jane has said, put your union badge on, put your union T-shirt on, and go and meet them. Go and meet the strikers, talk to them, give them solidarity, bring them coffee, tea, do whatever you have to do to support these workers in struggle. There's a class war happening at the minute, and we're not winning it. And we're not winning it because of restrictions like the 1990 Act. But I do know for a fact, and I'm willing that this happens, that communities will rise. And they will rise because of people like Jane Crowe and people like Valerie and the shop stewards within Debenhams. They will rise. And we will fight for future legislation. We will fight for a fair resolution to this dispute. Now, whether it's going to be what we want it to be, maybe not, but we'll do the best we possibly can, and we'll bring back the best deal that's possible at this point in time, and we will ballot the members on that. But again, I just want to make that call on behalf of Mandate Trade Union as a national coordinator to all of our members. If you're anywhere near a Debenhams picket line, please attend, wear your T-shirts, wear your badges, and up the workers.
And I'll add to that. I'm a member of Connect Trade Union, and I would call on all Connect Trade Union members to come out and support as well. And I wouldn't stop at Connect, SIP2, Force, or whatever union you're in. As a trade unionist, if you have 10 minutes to spare or 10 hours to spare, get your arse down there and stand with the workers, because as I say, their fight is our fight. It's Jane and our colleagues today. It can be you and me tomorrow. And, like all I can do is say that the workers of Ireland applaud you, Jane. They're fully, wholeheartedly behind you and admire you, and you're an inspiration to us all. 140 days, and it's been a rough out 140 days, with the pandemic as well. The pandemic alone is hard, but to be sacked in the middle of it and then be left high and dry, like sort of thing, you are an absolute inspiration to the rest of us. And I call on all workers across the country and further afield to stand with you. And on behalf of the Communist Party and the Socialist Voice, I'd like to thank you both for joining us, and up the workers. An injury to one is an injury to all. Either way.
Thanks.